Let's be in prayer as we dive into our subject for today. Almighty God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather in fellowship, in communion, and in prayer. We pray that through this time of discernment, through this time of listening and seeking to understand our place in your church and your church's place in the world, that you would help us to see ways that we can be neighbors that make an impact, that transform, and that bring you glory. We pray that you be with us in this time. In Jesus' name, amen. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I apologize for that, but my name is Brandon Harris. I'm the executive pastor here, and today we're going to be discussing the subject, Now What? We have heard from three different faith leaders about the sort of neighbors who are around us, our religious others. And so the big question that the Commission on Religion and Race has wanted us to consider is, now what? When we hear that question, there's often an inclination to do something. We want to be active. We want to take action and make things happen. And that's not a bad thing to do, but I would suggest that after hearing from all these different religious leaders, the real thing the first question we need to ask, perhaps a more fundamental question, and that's always a dangerous word when you're talking among Christians, fundamental, but here's a more fundamental question, and that is, what are we supposed to do? What is the church supposed to do, and to what end? So, I think we need to ask that question first, because we may otherwise go off and we may do something that's not very helpful. What is the church supposed to do? Another way of asking that is the personal question. See, we can ask what are we supposed to do, and then it's somebody else's problem, right? So, the question I guess I'm really getting at is, what is a disciple of Jesus supposed to do? Raise your hand if you aspire to be a disciple of Jesus. Okay, so this is your question. What is a disciple of Jesus supposed to do? Now, by way of getting to that question, there has been an elephant in the room these last 3 weeks. You've probably noticed him. We haven't really touched upon him because it's difficult to do that when you're in mixed religious company. But I think we need to name this elephant, and that is the problem of our evangelical stance toward our religious other, the neighbor who is a religious other. Our evangelical stance toward a Hindu or a Jew or a Muslim. Now, this problem always comes up when Christians start talking about people of other faiths. If you've been in the Bible Belt for very long, you sort of know how this problem is constructed. And if you're new to the South, I'll kind of help you wrap your head around this. It usually goes something like this. Jesus said we're supposed to proclaim the good news of salvation and make disciples of all people. Jesus also said, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Then we start to realize the faith groups we encountered are not Christian groups. They do not worship the triune God as we do. They do not believe in and recognize Jesus of Nazareth as Lord, God, and Savior as we do. And they do not share the same perspectives on the way of salvation as we do. So our little wheels start to turn. And the result is something like this. Doesn't that mean that all these other religions are false religions? And if we don't convince them of the good news that Jesus is the way of salvation, so they can receive that salvation, then they will certainly perish and go to hell. Have you ever heard anybody connect those dots in that way? Have you ever wondered, is that really the way the dots are connected? Well, if you don't carry that evangelical baggage, you at least can recognize the logical dilemma in the fact that our faith tradition has all these claims about authority and rightness, and other faith traditions do too. So that's our elephant. And Christians have tended to take three general approaches to him. The first is something that we could call exclusive.
when I start to write on a whiteboard, it makes me feel like a real teacher, but you're not going to be able to read it, so I'm just going to do it anyway. All right, exclusivism. So the exclusivist approach is, and this is one that you often hear in the South. It's an extreme stance, often held by a lot of conservative evangelical Christians, that say other religions are totally false. If there are any people within them who are good by Christian standards, it's of no use, because they will not be saved. Because Christianity is the only way. And to accept any specific tenet or practice or belief that diverges from a Christian point of view is tantamount to rejecting God, because God has ordained Christianity as the only religion, and therefore, well, you can follow the path from there. Now, the problems with this are many. At its core, it rejects and ignores the scriptural witness that Jesus embraces all sorts of religious others. He welcomes all kinds of people into his community. He has substantive fellowship and interreligious dialogue, for instance, with the Pharisees, with whom he shared only some of the same religious perspectives. Now, they were both Jews, but they had different perspectives. It also forgets that Jesus engaged with Samaritans and Gentiles, who were way apart, far apart from Jesus in terms of his religious convictions. And he even saved, and the Bible uses that word, he saved the servant of a Roman centurion. He saved him when he was near to death. And this Roman centurion's servant, I can almost bet, had never gotten on his knees and said the sinner's prayer. He had never been baptized with believer's baptism. Yet he saved him. Lastly, Jesus tells plenty of parables about people who checked all the right boxes, but who got left out in the cold. While those who thought they were in, they were out. And those who were out were welcomed in. And Jesus reminds the disciples, I have other sheep who do not belong to this fold. So, to reject other religions as completely false and Christianity as the only right way is really not tenable by a healthy reading of the Scriptures. You can only really get there by taking some of those verses out of context. So, a second approach is called inclusivism. Inclusivists propose that Christianity is the right way and the only way by which full salvation may be obtained, but that other religions have some contribution to prepare people to come into the right way. So other religions are sort of Christianity light, if you will. It is to say that this other religions. Let's use a literature example. You know, when you're in first grade, you learn to read by reading things like See Spot Run. But then by the time you're in high school, you're reading Walt Whitman and Charles Dickens and real literature. So inclusivists would say that's something like the way the religious world works. You can dabble in the right thing out in these other religions, but eventually you'll come into the real thing called Christianity. The problem here is that sharing the gospel, connecting with the gospel, coming into the kingdom of God, is not just about taking what you've learned in one place and applying it in a new way. To use the literature example, Christianity is a whole different vocabulary than some of the other faith traditions that are out there. Many inclusivists will also view other religions as containing vestiges of the truth, and if you add them all up, they will equal Christianity. Well, we can say that other religions have vestiges of truth. We can go there. But we can't say that if you add them up, they equal Christianity or they equal Jesus, because the call of Jesus actually demands that we reject everything we have learned, that we reject all of our certainties, that we deny ourselves, and we have our conception of truth reordered as we follow the path that he lays out. Now, a third approach is called pluralism. Pluralists sort of look at all of the different faith traditions as valid ways to salvation. They are sort of equal paths up the same mountain, if you will. In other words, pluralism puts every religion on the same footing. A pluralist would simply say that no religion can claim to be the truth. There are all different perceptions of the ultimate truth. Now, we could challenge this on a couple of points. Firstly, the Scriptures and church tradition have said that truth is not a philosophical principle. Truth was incarnate, was embodied in Jesus of Nazareth. So if you put your faith in Jesus, you know there can only be one ultimate truth, and we know his name. Secondly, pluralism assumes that God is largely this external reality, and religions are devices of human beings to try to get to him, that we're trying to work our way up the mountain to get to God. But Christian theology has always claimed that it was God who came to us, and not the other way around. God became internal to our lives. Again, we met him, and we know his name. So there are problems with each of these, but the problem with all of them, that all of them have in common, is that they are all concerned with this question of who may be saved. And that's a Christian question. That's a question that we in the church are really obsessed about. Exclusive, inclusive, pluralist, all of these are curious about salvation. Non-Christians are not really worried about that question, at least not in the same way we are. So our Christian preoccupation with salvation is not a good basis for engaging people of other faiths. I loved that Rabbi Bernstein actually used an illustration. He was talking about going to the party, and he met this evangelical Christian who tried to save him. And he's like, am I your best catch? Am I your easiest catch here? So that's not a good... If we're going to have substantive interreligious dialogue, this is not the question we need to be engaging people on. At least not at first. Other religions have different questions that they're asking. It's good to go back to the pluralist illustration of a path up the same mountain. Other religions are on different mountains altogether. Some of them are in different mountain ranges. Religions are those systems and structures in our lives that define the way we think. They help us frame the world. They're the lens through which we think about the goals of our lives and we gauge our place in the world. Other religions have different goals, values, and questions that can be quite different from ours. I think you heard that these last few weeks. Each of our guest speakers articulated it. But by this definition, we can also see that a religion doesn't have to be an historical faith like Islam or Judaism or Christianity. A religion, by that definition, is simply a set of values and a framework for understanding our way in the world. It can be pretty much any ideology. It can be a family system. It can be a culture. Whatever ultimately defines someone's commitments and perspectives. Our engagement with those of other faiths, or our engagement with people of no faith, must reckon with an acknowledgement that, number one, we have a religion that defines our perspective, and they have a religion that defines theirs. There's no such thing as a view from nowhere. Even those who claim objectivity, who claim to be outside of religion, have some kind of commitment that somehow serves as the context for their perspectives. For Christians, that's Jesus. We say He is the way, the truth, and the life. That's what He's getting at. He is our perspective. He is our context for defining and understanding life in the world. Others' commitments will be different, but we have to allow those perspectives to stand on our own. Now, this does not preclude an open mind. Maybe it's important to say right here that the very faith tradition from which we engage the world does not allow us to be closed-minded. It does. The paradox there is, or the oxymoron there is, our faith tradition is intolerant of intolerance. So how do you work that out? Well, it calls for charity. It calls us to be, in the words of James, slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen. We have to have humility and grace and discernment. So this elephant of our evangelical relationship, are we supposed to save others from the burning fires of hell? I hope that I have deconstructed that somewhat. Let's return to that question that I posed at the beginning. What are we, what are you, what are disciples supposed to do about these other faith traditions? These aren't the answer. But I think neighboring is. And that's kind of where Dave started us off. That Jesus seems to be putting us disciples on a footing of being a neighbor. So the gospel stories themselves give a clear vision of what it means to engage people in this way, especially when they have diverse religious perspectives. After all, the Gospels were written to people who lived in the Roman Empire. That was a veritable melange of religious commitments. There was Judaism. There was pagan Roman kind of emperor worship. There was Zoroastrianism. There was ancestor worship. There were all these religious commitments that were scattered throughout the Roman Empire in these communities in which the Gospels were first read. And the Gospels themselves, when you consider that they were written to tell the story about Jesus, they underscore that our relationship to these other religions is first and foremost one of storytelling. We're telling a story. We're telling the story of what Jesus has been up to in our lives. But if we're thinking of that question, what are we supposed to do? Storytelling is actually second phase work. You can only tell a story compellingly when you have a relationship with someone who's ready to listen to that story. So you need that first phase. And the Gospels presume this. If you have your Bible, open up to the Gospel of John, the very first chapter. So John, along with all these other evangelists, these other gospel writers, he's telling a story. He's about to tell this story about this guy named Jesus and what Jesus did to restore the relationship between God and human beings, God and creation. But the first order of business in just about any story is to introduce the main characters. And so Jesus is introduced front and center. Look at verses 4 and 5. Jesus is here addressed, he's spoken of as light coming into the darkness. Light coming into the darkness. The light was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Now hold your finger there. That's a helpful image. That's a helpful image because John speaks in his gospel a lot about truth. And here John is comparing the truth and the light. He's drawing them in parallel with each other. But he's not putting truth as this multiple choice test. Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity. Well, that's the right one. That's not how John is presenting truth. He's presenting it as light. In terms of light and dark. Think about this room. The lights are on, but there are some places in this room that are relatively dark. Under the podium here, under the chairs, behind the bookshelf. There are places where it's darker. It would be impossible for us to draw a line and say this is where the light begins and the dark ends. Instead, there's just varying degrees of light from the source to the shadow. from the light itself to the darkest corner. So John says right at the beginning of this gospel that this story he's telling is a story about truth. It's a story about light that has come into the world. But John didn't just make this story up. He heard it from others who heard it from others. And he tells us about another man named John who was among the first to see it. This man we know as John the Baptist. And if you turn to verse 8 there in chapter 1, John the Evangelist says of John the Baptist, he himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light, to witness to the light. So often in interreligious dialogue, we want to say, you're right and you're wrong. This is true, this is untrue. This is valid, this is invalid. But notice how this other John goes about his work. He doesn't come in to draw the line between light and dark. He simply comes to point to the light. There is where the light shines. He was trying to point to the truth embodied in Jesus. This is still our role in the world, to point to the truth, to point to where we have seen the light. But it's important to recognize that we don't bring light to people or somehow possess the light exclusively in ourselves. Leslie Newbegin, a late bishop of the Church of England, says that John the Baptist's role in the Gospel of John is actually a helpful model for us as we seek to go out and do our evangelical work. Now, let me digress for a moment and say, I'm not saying we shouldn't share the good news. I'm not saying we shouldn't be evangelical and tell others about Jesus. We should. We just have to be careful how we do it. And Leslie Newbegin is really clear that John the Baptist's mode of doing it is a great model. Newbegin says, in their dealing with men and women who do not acknowledge Jesus as Lord, Christians will meet them and share with them in a common life, not as strangers, but as those in whom the same life-giving light shines. Go back in the Gospel to verse 3. All things came into being through him. Speaking of the light, speaking of Jesus. All things came into being through him. And without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. All people. Life wasn't just the light of Christians. It was the light of all people. And we're apt to miss that if we go into the world thinking we are bringing God to the heathen. At the core of our faith is this story that says God's presence precedes us. God is already at work in the world. God is working in the world, including in the life of our religious others. And our job is to bear witness to where we have seen the light in a way that others will notice that too. So going back to Newbegin, he says that Christians doing the work of witness will recognize and rejoice in the evidences they find of a response to the same God from whom alone life and light come. They will join with their non-Christian neighbors in all that serves life against death and light against darkness. They will expect to learn as well as to teach, to receive as well as to give. Notice that doesn't allow us to dismiss the religious convictions of others, because the light is shining in them. That doesn't allow us to dismiss their religious convictions, but it also doesn't allow us to dismiss our own. Christians have this bad habit of going into interreligious dialogues and kind of blathering on about this amorphous God who was never, as if he has never been incarnate in a person named Jesus. He has. We have a particular God who did a particular thing in a particular place that we believe has impacted everyone. So we can't lay that aside, and I don't think our religious others want us to do that. I don't think that the leaders that we hosted here in this room want us to be any less Christian, any more than we should ask them to be any less Hindu or any less Jewish or Muslim. We just have to be ready to share in a common life, seeking the truth, seeking the light, so that we can discover together more fully and more clearly where that light really is breaking in. So what does all this have to do with being a neighbor? If you'll turn back in John and look at verse 14. If you've been in Sunday school before, you've probably read this. If you've been at a Christmas worship service, you've read this. The Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen His glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's that articulation that truth has become incarnate, and that's who we worship. But I love the way Eugene Peterson paraphrases this verse in the Message Bible. He does this remarkable artistry with this idea of dwelling among us. The Greek word there is skenao. It's a technical word that means pitching a tent or constructing a booth or a hut. And so he extrapolates that to this idea that this is what the Word has done. It has pitched its tent. It has built a booth. The Word became flesh and blood, he says, and moved into our neighborhood. Let's imagine that. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into our neighborhood. That's something that has a lot of resonance for me. As you know, I have recently moved into a new neighborhood. And so the last few weeks have been taken up with lots of front yard conversations with people going back and forth, walking their dogs, getting to know them. We've had conversations with the neighbors on both sides of us to try to understand the neighborhood covenants. What we can and can't do. Nobody's written us a nastygram yet, thank goodness. But they're trying to adapt to us being in the neighborhood. There were 2 bachelor brothers that lived there before. And so a family with 2 kids is a different thing. We're trying to adapt to them. We're trying to figure out how to do life together. Well, this is what happened with Jesus. Consider that at the heart of our faith, microphone keeps cutting out. I'm going to try this one. Consider that at the heart of our faith is this story that said God came into our neighborhood. And He's trying to figure out how to do life with us. He's learning our rhythms, and He's asking us to learn His. He engaged with people who were around Him. He participated in their lives. They participated in His. And at the core of His mission, everywhere He went, His MO was to orient us, as Newbegin says, to all that serves life against death and light against darkness. And He was inviting His neighbors to share in that work, in that sort of living. Light over dark, life over death. That story of how God and Jesus moved into our neighborhood has to shape how we move into our own neighborhoods. This is the relationship piece of that, what are we supposed to be doing? We have to be moving into the neighborhood, joining God out there where God has already gone before us. We're not trying to save people from the burning fires of hell, but rather to participate in their lives in a way that they can see the light. And while we're doing that, we'll have opportunities to bear witness. We'll have opportunities to tell stories. We'll have opportunities to name explicitly where that light is shining. But first, we have to pitch our tent in the neighborhood. And folks, this doesn't have to be complicated. We don't need a fancy program for witness or evangelism to move into our neighborhoods. We don't need that. We simply have to live lives with our neighbors. But increasingly, we're having a hard time doing this. My daughter, 8 years old, has made friends with a little girl that she met at summer camp a couple of weeks ago. And we've gotten to know the family over the last few weeks. They have just moved here about a year ago from Israel. And I had a chance to meet the dad for the first time last week. Jennifer had already met the family, and she actually had told them about our Join Together July focus. It was the same day, actually, that Rabbi Bernstein was here. They don't go to his synagogue, but there you go. He said, this guy said, when I moved from Israel, I had heard about Southern hospitality. I was expecting to be overwhelmed with people inviting me over to their homes and people coming into my home. He said, since I've been here, my only encounters with my neighbors have been waving at them from the driveway. We've got to get better at neighboring. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to define the word neighbor. We talked about that at the beginning of this Sunday school series. But it's got to be more than just waving at people from the driveway. So, it's the theologian Scott Boren. He offers some helpful ideas about what it means to be a neighbor. He says insightfully that the first step in being a neighbor is to practice presence in the neighborhood. That goes back to pitching your tent. He says when we practice presence in the neighborhood, we give people the opportunity to feel the life of the gospel and not just hear it. If we're not present in the neighborhood, we have no credibility whatsoever to witness in more overt ways. Presence, he says, establishes us as people who live in this world and as people who have a God who can do something about what's going on in it. What it takes to be present is to pitch our tents at those places in our lives where we're most likely to build relationships with others. Again, this doesn't have to be complicated. Be present in your neighborhood. Be present at the pool or at the tennis courts. Be present on the sports fields and in civic clubs. Be present at your kids' school. At work, be present around the water fountain or in the cafeteria or wherever it is your coworkers hang out. If you go to the country club, be present with those who are there. But be present not just with those who are like you. Be like Jesus and seek out those who you suspect are not and do life with them. And through that journey, I think you'll see more clearly where that light is coming from. Let me be clear. Don't make these people into a target. This is not a church growth plan. Now, maybe they will join our church. Their lives to Jesus. That would be wonderful, but that is not your goal. Your goal is to do life. Invest in them by showing them hospitality. Invest in them by learning their story. Invest in them by sharing love, doing practical things for them. We have forgotten as a society how to do this. And if my newfound friend who just moved here from Israel is any indication, it shows. Neighboring of this type happens in very mundane ways. Alan Roxburgh, who is he's a missional theologian, he talks about a man named Bob from Edmonton, California, who decided to try, Edmonton, Canada, who decided to try this out. He recognized that the lady across the street from him was elderly and could not cut her own lawn, so he volunteered to do it. And he'd go up there once a week and he'd cut her grass. Now, he wanted to cut her grass. He wanted to do something helpful, but he also wanted to start something more. And he knew this was going to work because people, when you live in a neighborhood, you start to recognize patterns, right? You know who lives where and what their patterns are. And so you, our first inclination when we notice something out of pattern sometimes is call the police. You know, that was the case in my neighborhood in Birmingham anyway. But luckily, nobody called the police on John. It's just people stopped to say, on Bob, is it, Bob, what's going on? You don't live here. What's going on? And he was able to tell the story about this lady who needed help. People would stop their cars. People would come out on their front lawn to just find out, Bob, what are you doing? Well, in these conversations, he learned, well, there are others in this neighborhood who also cannot cut their own lawns. So within a few months, Bob was cutting 3 or 4 lawns. And those relationships multiplied. That's the amazing thing. It was taking Bob like 45 minutes to cut the grass when it should have just taken 10. Because people were coming out to find out, what are you doing here? And he had conversations. And he and his wife turned those conversations into something more. Soon they were inviting their neighbors over for coffee and for dinner. And they were calling each other to share about big life events, to engage with each other about the difficult circumstances that they were facing. They were talking about their fears and struggles and hopes and dreams. And Bob, being a disciple of Jesus, couldn't enter into those conversations without that light. And looking for that light that was shining in the lives of others. Bob couldn't talk about these things without bearing witness to where that light was shining in his life and in the lives of his neighbors. Now, Bob was not the light. But he went into his own neighborhood to bear witness to the light that had already moved in. And I think that's what God's looking for from us. To be really simple about this, I think God's looking for us to join him in the neighborhood. In our neighborhoods. And I mean our literal neighborhoods. Now, we're going to do some things as a church with these faith communities that we've heard from and spoken with. We're going to do some official programs where we'll join together in fellowship and in service, and we'll have formal dialogue and informal conversation and fellowship. But each of us, that what am I supposed to do as a disciple? That question. We're supposed to be neighbors. What if we took that literally and focused on the neighbors who actually live right around us? I'm going to ask, they've got some things to pass out. I found a book last year called The Art of Neighboring. And the simple idea in the book is that as Christians, we should be a neighbor to everyone, yes. But we should begin in our own backyard, in our own front yard, in our own side yard. So in this book, they have, the authors put this chart. They call it the chart of shame. For obvious reasons. It's a block map. You'll notice that right in the middle of this map is a house that's colored in. This is your house. Now, if you don't live in a yard where there are in a house where there are 8 literal neighbors around you, just adapt this for your own purposes. Maybe you've just got 2 or you've got 6 or whatever. But adapt this for your own purposes. Your house is right in the middle, and you probably have at most 8 neighbors around you. I want you to think right now, do you know their names of the people around all corners of your home? All right, that's level 1. That's level 1 familiarity. If you know their names, you're doing pretty good. Now, this is where the chart of shame bit comes in, because that's just surface level. Level 2 is, do you know something about them that you can't see or learn from the driveway? The fact that they drive a Honda Accord does not count. You can see that. So do you know that they have children who live somewhere? Or do you know that they've just lost their parents? All right? So do you know something about them that you can't see from the driveway? And level 3, do you know something important about their story that makes them who they are? So, I gave you this chart, not just so you could look at it while I'm talking, but so you can take it home and you can put it on your refrigerator. And I'd love for you to be intentional about building relationships with those people who live around your home. Don't make them into a target. Just engage with them. Be their neighbor. Now, if you are already, if you're able to complete all three of those things, their name, I'm going to write this down if I can find the marker. Here we go. So level 1 is name. Level 2 is something about them. And then number 3 is something about their story that makes them who they are. So if you can already do those things, then you've graduated and you can teach the rest of us. But I'll be honest, we know the names of some of our neighbors, but we don't know all of them. And we certainly haven't gotten to level 2 and 3 yet. But we're going to work on it. We're new. Yeah.
We'll give you.
Well, I'll be honest. I lived in my in the neighborhood that we were in Birmingham. I had that with a couple of people, but not all of them. And I'm ashamed of that, because I think once you get here, this is where you do the true work of neighboring. You truly build those relationships that enable you to witness. All right. What are your questions, thoughts, concerns about today or anything that we've talked about the last 4 weeks? Yes.
When you approach these different religious leaders,
I'll tell you what, I'm going to pass this to you and tell everybody.
when you approach the different religious leaders to come and present, was it, did you have to go to 5 different Jewish synagogues to get one? I mean, how open were they to share this?
Well, we actually had great relationships with the Muslim leader, Rabbi Bernstein, and the Muslim leader, Tarif Saib, and the Jewish leader, Rabbi Bernstein. We did not have an existing relationship with a Hindu leader. And so that was actually a point of conversation. We were a little bit ashamed that we didn't know anyone between 3 of us.
It is true. It took us a while to find a Hindu temple. But the ironic thing is that we actually had a bit of a relationship with them. Ron McGott can share a little bit about this, but about a year ago, I think a year and a half ago, Pastor Tillman, while he was still here, had a couple of interactions with that same temple. I think he had taken some of our members to their temple to interact with them. And did they come here at all?
No.
We would just see them. Okay. And there was a couple of interactions though, weren't there? You had gone over there a couple of times. Yeah. I was not aware of that when we first started trying to find a Hindu representative. I wasn't aware of that, and so we did sort of a gunshot approach. But then I wound up talking to Ron, and I think I talked to Pastor Brian as well, and they mentioned that we had had a previous relationship with them, and so that door opened pretty smoothly after.
Where do you see the challenges of this? It's practical, it's easy in concept, but what makes it hard?
I think the perspective of the question that we always start with, or the lens that we look through, are you saved, is a huge hurdle. And it is very myopic, and it causes all kinds of problems as you interact with people of different faiths.
Yeah, it's not wrong to have that conversation, but don't lead with it. If you really consider that these are different mountain ranges, different mountains, and interreligious dialogue constitutes building bridges, it takes a long time to build a bridge between those kind of ideas. We have to deal with it at some point because it's a core part of our theology. I will say that, as you may have picked up in some of the things I said, I don't think we always deal with that theology in as orthodox a way as we can or should. I think it's been skewed over the centuries by forces that aren't really biblical. For instance, I don't think going to heaven is the same thing as going to Disneyland. It's not about having a ticket to get in. Heaven is something God is doing among us. Jesus showed up and said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He didn't show up demanding tickets. He brought heaven with him. So the kingdom of heaven is whatever, is the reality where God is doing God's thing and people are joining in. So we have to get straight before we even get to this in our interreligious dialogue. We have to get that theology straight in our own minds. So,
I think another hurdle is we don't understand, obviously, each other's cultures, which is what we need to go about doing. But there tends to be a tendency with human nature to hang with those that you are most like. Not necessarily that you like them, but they're most like you. And I've heard over and over again, well, the Muslims or the Indians or the whatever in my neighborhood just never socialize. So there's a I guess that makes it a bigger hurdle to overcome when if you are the one trying, you've got to get a reciprocal response somehow in order to build a relationship.
Yeah, you're right. The cultural dimensions make, especially when we start talking about our story, those cultural differences make it hard for us to understand those stories and to appreciate the significance of those stories. And the further apart cultures are, the more unlike kind of Eurocentric culture, Protestant culture, it's hard. But Jesus never really gave us that he didn't give us that as an excuse. I know you weren't begging for an excuse, but it was raising the obvious there. And Jesus didn't give us a pass on that. He had dialogue with the Samaritan woman and the Syrophoenician woman, and if you go, I would encourage you to go read that story of Jesus' encounter with the Canaanite woman, where he says, well, it's not right for the bread to be thrown or the children's bread to be thrown to the dogs. That's a really awkward dialogue, right? And so we should expect the same thing when we enter into dialogue with our other.
I want to comment on the last question. So this is built into the DNA of the early church as well. When you look at the book of Acts and you look at the formation of the early church, you look at Acts chapter 1 and 2, the disciples go into the upper room and they receive the power of the Holy Spirit. And one of the first things that the power of the Holy Spirit enables them to do is to go out into the streets and speak about the gospel in different languages. It's the very first power that God gives them, is this power of tongues. And not spiritual tongues as in just, what we hear about sometimes in Pentecostal churches. This was literally tongues as in different languages. And in fact, one of the questions that's raised is, are these people drunk, right? Like, what's going on here? Why am I able to hear what they're saying in my own language? Why am I able to hear this gospel message in my own language? And of course, the early apostles are saying, well, this is the power that God has given us to go and share this good news in different languages in our own surrounding area, our own community. And then, of course, one of the central debates in the early church is between Paul and the other apostles. Paul says, we need to start sending this message beyond just the Jews. That early encounter in Acts is actually, they're sharing the gospel in different languages, but it's to other Jews who speak different languages. And Paul's the one who starts saying, this isn't just for Jews. We need to start sending this message out to the rest of the world, to the Gentiles. And it's a bit of a tension because the original apostles are like, well, no, this message is really just for us. It's for us as Jews. And we need to keep this to ourselves. But Paul caught on to what Jesus was always preaching, which is that this goes beyond us. The gospel message has always been for the world, and in fact, I'm on too much of a roll. I'm going to shut up here.
Sorry.
One of the things I think that the Hebrews missed in the Old Testament, they were the chosen people, but not just so that they could go in a corner and be, us and God. They were blessed to be a blessing. The idea was always that through them, the rest of the world would come to know God. They were sort of the priestly nation. They were to serve as priests to the rest of the world so that we would have a connection through them to God. So we have this human fear of reaching out to people who are other than us and different from us. But the thread throughout the whole Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament, is always this message of God trying to reach the whole world through Abraham and his descendants, and eventually through Jesus and through what he does through Paul. It's a message that's always intended not just for us, but for the entire world. And so, we have to pray for the willingness to surrender some of that fear and see what God enables us.
And let me piggyback on that to say that the goal had always been for that kind of, in fact, Isaiah says, a light to all nations. So going back to John's idea of light, the goal is never to convert people to cultural Christianity, Euroculture, the European culture of Christianity. The goal is to help people appreciate, see, and recognize the light. That's the distinction and the place where we kind of have to unshackle our vision for what evangelism means. Evangelism doesn't mean getting somebody to come down to the altar, making a profession of faith, and suddenly becoming a member of our church. It can include that, but it may not always include that.
I want to get back to the initial list of 3 things.
Yes.
I think the biggest barrier, one of the biggest barriers is, number one, we're all busy with our own lives. And in the morning when you pray to have God hear you all day, you need to pray, show me opportunities. And then, instead of rushing in when we get home and we get the mail out of the mailbox, if we see our neighbor next door that we don't know very well, we can stop and say a few words. Because every relationship has to have a basis of knowing each other.
Yes.
And that's the hardest thing, because we don't want to go and meet somebody that we think we're going to be rebuffed, or they're not going to want to meet us, or what do I say?
And I would also add that praying that prayer, having God with you all day. I mean, the story of the Bible and of the Gospels anyway is that God is out there. If we're truly going to connect with God, we've got to connect with somebody else. Yes, God is here too, but if we're truly going to encounter God, we've got to encounter with others.
But we have to remember to look up from our regular routines, including here. When
Yes.
I sat down this morning, she told me I was the first person to say hello. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Who else had some comments in the back?
I think one of the things that is a challenge for us is technology.
Is the what?
Technology.
Oh, technology.
We've gotten to the point where we're on Facebook, so we think that we're friends with everybody, but we're not friends with anybody. And we have forgotten to get out in the driveway and talk to neighbors. And I think that's one of the things. The other thing is technology gives you a really big base. Technology gives you a really big base of being able to be critical to other people. And we've lost respect in a lot of ways. And you don't have to agree with everything your next door neighbor says. You just have to show them respect. And I think they were saying something about the other cultures not wanting us to come by. Part of that is that they have been bashed and attacked so much that they're afraid of us. And they'd rather build the wall than bring it down to create that friendship. And I think we have to be a little bit more conscious about what's going on technology. And, if it's not something we can say to somebody face to face, we don't say it that way. And I think it's that lack of respect that's happening.
And Facebook and Twitter especially are built for one-way communication.
Yeah.
And you're gonna the whole point of this process is to hear other people's stories. And Facebook and Twitter don't really allow that very easily. Who else has? Yes?
I think sometimes we want to do something grand. I think it can be a very simple act. And I was at the mall at a department store, and anybody who knows me knows that I love babies. And I want to hold babies. And so I saw this family who I'm guessing were Muslim. And I've never had really any interaction with Muslims. I haven't had them as a neighbor or anything. But I talked to the baby first. And, who was maybe 10 months old.
Did she talk back?
Yeah, she was very friendly. And the mom was there, who I'm guessing was the daughter with parents. And they spoke very little English, but the mom could communicate. And so we had a friendly little conversation, nothing deep or spiritual, but maybe the light shone. And later on I thought of it, and I thought, you know, if I thought about, I've seen Muslims, but I haven't talked to them. But because of the baby, I did talk to them. And so I would hope they would have a better feeling, and I certainly had a better feeling.
Great. So we need to wrap up. Let me issue some guidance to the Sunday school class leaders. Raise your hand if you're one of the leaders for a Sunday school class. I would love for you, over the coming months, at random, to issue pop quizzes. So I want you to just ask your class, just poll the class, and say, how many of you are at level 1 with 3 or more of your neighbors? How many of you are at level 2 with 3 or more of your neighbors? You know, so just poll the class to keep us focused on this. Because my sister here said that we just really need to start simple. And that's exactly right. I'm not asking you to go and solve the interreligious dialogue problem between all of Muslims and all of Jews and all of Christians. All I'm asking you to do is to know the name, something about your neighbor, and something about their story. Your literal neighbor. And that begins with just going outside when you see your neighbor checking the mail and having a conversation. Saying, you know, Sally, I'd love for you to come over for coffee. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? And it does take us getting outside of our routines. And it takes intentionality, but that intentionality doesn't have to be really complicated. We don't have to have some grand program. We're just meeting our neighbors. So I'm going to try to hold you to this, and I'm going to hold me to it. Do some pop quizzes for me.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
I think the big thing is you need to look for things that you have in common with these people, not things that are different. I've been privileged to serve on the board of directors of the Interfaith Children's Movement for about 8 or 9 years. And we bonded over the task of doing what's best for our children. And you people who have young kids in school, you got a perfect opportunity, because the public schools, especially in this area, are very diverse, lots of different religions. Other parents in your kids' classroom have the same problems you have. So that's a perfect introduction. Look for what you have in common, not what's different.
Thank you. All right, let me pray for us, and then we'll head to worship and to our other commitments for today. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunities to serve you in it. Thank you for the opportunity to encounter others in whom your light shines. Help us together to discern where there is light shining in the darkness, where there is truth breaking into our world, and help us to commit to that above all else. As we look ahead to today, to our afternoon and our evening, lay before us opportunities where we can connect, where we have already failed, redeem that failure, and set us anew in life. We pray this in your Son's holy name. Amen.